So for instance, handicap can be considered an accurate and correct measure of health. It measures one important dimension of health, the functional ability dimension of health. The same thing for different illnesses, different health conditions like heart attacks, diabetes. These diseases are also accurate and correct measures of health. Diabetes and heart failures, heart attacks are also valid measures for health. They can correctly and accurately portray the physical functions of health. They can accurately assess physical health, diabetes, headaches, heart failures, and so on. The same can be said for stress, anxieties, depression. These three are valid measures of mental health, another aspect of health, another dimension of health. The same thing yet can be said for ability to walk, to bathe, to count money, and whatnot, to do daily activities. These are valid measures of functional health, like handicap, the functional dimension of health. So, ability to walk, to bathe, to do activities, to walk your dog, or even, are valid measures of functional health. And some surveys ask respondents, or if the respondents are too sick or too old, or due to other reasons, he or she cannot answer the survey. Sometimes they ask somebody to represent that respondents. We call that person a proxy. So regardless of the survey that interviews the respondents or a proxy, sometimes surveys have questions on people's memory. How good is their memory? So memory is another valid measure of cognitive function. Cognitive function is another dimension of health. Cognitive ability. So, memory is a valid measure of cognitive ability. Memory can be used to accurately and correctly measure cognitive functioning aspect of health. Are we clear? So we've been through this before. The same thing can be said for SES, or socio-economic status. SES can be proxied by at least 4 things, or maybe more than 4. I can think of 4 right now. Can you think of any other than this? Okay. So, SES can be correctly and accurately measured by education. And we've been through this before. Education is a measure of structural inequality. Some kind of structural disadvantage is implied in education, different levels of education in the years of schooling. People who are more fortunate had more years of schooling, usually. People who are more fortunate had higher levels of education. And SES can also be correctly and accurately measured by income. Income represents an inflow of resources. That inflow can be one time, can be sporadic, can be regular. But income represents an inflow of something, resources we call that. And SES can also be correctly and accurately measured by wealth. Wealth represents some kind of reserve. Wealth represents yet a different aspect of SES. It has the connotations of reserve, something accumulated over time. So wealth is another valid measure of social economic status. And SES can also be accurately and correctly measured by stocks, bonds, and whatnot. Stocks and bonds also represent the inflow of resources. It can be one-time, regular, routine, or sporadic. Are we clear? So the same thing can be said for a person's personality. Extroversion, introversion, empathy. Usually it's quite stable across the person's lifespan if nothing drastic happens in that person's life. Usually, different measures for personalities are quite reliable. But in some instances, maybe something drastic happened in that person's family, a death, divorce, or something. And there's a drastic, significant change in that person's personality. So in that instance, maybe personality traits may not be reliable measures. But maybe sometimes the person may recover, and after that, personality traits becomes reliable measures again. It becomes consistent again when the person get over, recover, and whatnot. So, is the number of friends a reliable measure of a person's likability? You have more friends, you are more like. Is that true? The number of friends. Is that a reliable measure of likability? How do we define friendship? Oh my, the definition varies from person to person. It's a broad and multi-dimensional concept, like SES, like health. And different people may define the meaning of friendship differently. So because of that, number of friends is not a reliable measure of likability. Some are more popular, some are more influential, some are more charismatic. It also depends on the person's personality. And is the number of friends a valid measure of likability? The number of friends, does it accurately and correctly assess a person's likability? No. So number of friends is not a reliable and is also not a valid measure of a person's likability. Are we clear? So, have you seen survey questions that ask people to report their own health, self-report health? How is your health? And you have options to select: excellent, very good, good, fair, poor. Have you seen something like that? Surveys, questionnaires that ask you to report your own health. Do you think that is a valid measure of health? When you ask respondents to self-report their health. You can get it. When you ask respondents to self-report their health, is that a valid measure of health? Sure, yes. Usually respondents are pretty honest. We are right. So, and respondents, usually their self-report health do not change drastically. They are consistent. They are either stable, slightly improving over time, or slightly consistently declining over time. And what about self-report visual functioning states? Sometimes there are also surveys that ask respondents to rate their visual function, their eye ratings. Is that an accurate and correct measure of health? Visual functioning states. Yes, you're right, Joe. Yes and no. Why not? Okay.
But that's just me. Maybe other people are honest. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
It's also only one aspect of health. Like vision, if you can see,
Yeah.
you're not really that. I mean, your eyes are healthy, but you could be like, I don't know, have Lyme's disease or something and be able to see
Yeah.
still, I don't know.
If you don't get checked, if you don't get diagnosed, you think your eyes are fine. You see clearly, you see well. So it could be the inclination to give socially desirable answers. People lie. And sometimes you're not aware you have problems. If your eyes have not been diluted, you did not go through any testing for your eyesight. And health literacy also matters in people's assessment of their visual functioning states, in how people rate their eyes. Health literacy. Some people, they may not even know what visual impairment means. So how are they going to rate their health? Their visual health? It's not going to be accurate. So what are we going to do? We just don't believe that survey questions, there's nothing we can do? Or okay, I'll tell you what.
I know.
So, we have self-report visual functioning states, and you all tell me all the limitations, problems associated with self-report visual functioning states. And sometimes in some health surveys, they also have a different questionnaire on the same or a subset of respondents who also underwent clinically testing for their eyesight. We have two measures. So in this instance, these two are reliable if respondents are honest. Usually respondents are honest in most instances. They have some kind of health literacy. This is the 21st century now. So I think we can safely assume that respondents have some knowledge of what it means by visual impairment. So they can accurately answer this question without going through any testing. Or if they just been through an optometrist, they just took the basic test without having their eyes diluted, or even having their eyes diluted but no further clinical tests. They can accurately answer this question in a survey if they are honest. And if we have two measures in a data set, and if the two measures give almost the same results, people who report poor visual functioning have some clinical issues, visual related issues when they are clinically tested. When they go a step further, then these two measures are reliable. Are we clear? You can start.
We should get like a whole light setup and some microphones. Vlog style.
Just do it in this class.
So we've been through this before. Self-report health from excellent to poor, 5 or 6 category. And physicians diagnose diabetes, heart conditions and whatnot. Handicap, whether that person has a functional limitations and whether the person is depressed, clinically diagnosed, or the person manifests some kind of depressive symptoms, no appetite, have a hard time falling asleep, not motivated. These are all depressive symptoms. They are not clinically tested, but they are the symptoms associated with depression. And sometimes, if they are reliable, people who report poor health, they may be diagnosed with one of these things, diabetes, heart failure or whatnot. I think in this 21st century, people have a pretty good understanding. People have some level of health literacy of what is excellent health, what is poor health. Sometimes they are honest. So if you take these two measures into account at the same time, if they report poor health and they say that they have been diagnosed with one of these conditions, these two are reliable measures of health. Sometimes we have to look at two measures concurrently to see whether they are reliable measures of something. If we look at one, we are not very sure. This is how social science research is like. And if the person also has some kind of handicap, well, these three measures are even reliable, is even better. And if we ask further questions about whether that person has a hard time falling asleep, has no appetite, doesn't feel motivated all the time, and they said yes, oh, these 4 measures are even more reliable measures of health. Or if we ask the person, has he or she been clinically tested for depression? And that person said yes. And some reason we have their results linked from physicians after we get IRB approved. Wow, these 5 or 6 measures together are reliable measures of health, are we clear? And oftentimes, if you go to your ebook, if you go to the index, what is reliability? Most social science textbooks or behavioral science textbooks, they will give an example. Reliability means something like a scale, like a weight. When you step on the scale, if it gives you the same measurement every time, every day, every week, that scale is reliable. But that example does not accurately reflected in social science kinds of research. In social science kinds of research, sometimes we want to know whether a measure is reliable. We may need to look at 2 or more variables concurrently. Are we clear?